You're a kid, maybe 8 years old, standing in a shoe store with your mother. The salesman leads you over to a strange wooden cabinet, tall as a piece of furniture, with a slot near the bottom. He tells you to put your feet in. You look down through a little viewing port at the top, and there they are, your own foot bones, glowing greenish inside the outline of your new shoes. You wiggle your toes. It's kind of amazing. Your mom looks through her own port. So does the salesman. Nobody in this scene thinks anything is wrong. This isn't some rare, sketchy back alley device. This was, for several decades, a completely normal part of buying children's shoes in America. Here's the part that should genuinely stop you. That glowing green image wasn't some clever optical trick. It was a live X-ray. And at the peak of its popularity, over 10,000 of these machines were operating inside ordinary shoe stores across the United States, blasting radiation through the feet and bodies of anyone standing nearby. So the question is simple. How did an actual medical X-ray machine end up as a completely unregulated shoe shopping gimmick? And why did it take decades for anyone to seriously question it? Rewind to World War I. A Boston physician named Dr. Jacob Lowe developed a fluoroscope, a device that could produce a live, moving X-ray image, specifically to examine injured soldiers' feet without the painfully slow process of removing their boots first. It was a genuinely useful medical shortcut for a wartime hospital. After the war ended, Lowe realized this same technology had an obvious commercial application. If a fluoroscope could show a doctor the bones inside a soldier's boot, it could just as easily show a shoe salesman the bones inside a customer's new pair of shoes. By the early 1920s, shoe-fitting fluoroscopes, sometimes branded as the pedoscope, the footoscope, or the X-ray shoe fitter, started appearing in stores. The pitch was simple and appealing. This wasn't guesswork anymore. This was science. You could literally watch your child's toes wiggling inside the shoe on screen and know with total scientific certainty that the fit was correct. There's some genuine dispute among historians over exactly who deserves credit for the invention. Lowe has the strongest documented claim, but a Milwaukee shoe dealer named S.J. Brower reportedly began using a fitting fluoroscope as early as 1919. And a man named Matthew B. Adrian separately claimed his own patent for a similar device around the same period. Whatever the exact origin story, the underlying idea, repurposing wartime medical technology for retail, spread quickly across multiple inventors and companies almost simultaneously. By the 1950s, these machines had become a genuine fixture of American retail. Somewhere around 10,000 units were operating across shoe stores in the United States alone, with thousands more in the United Kingdom, Canada, and beyond. Here's the detail that makes this story genuinely strange, though. Despite the confident, scientific-sounding marketing, the machines never actually delivered much real benefit. The image only showed a single, flat, top-down view. It couldn't measure pressure points, couldn't detect where a shoe actually pinched, and required real skill to interpret correctly. Skill most shoe salesmen simply didn't have. Historians who've studied the device's marketing closely have made a pointed observation. The fluoroscope's true value wasn't in improving how shoes fit. It was in how effectively it sold shoes. The machine turned an ordinary shopping trip into a small, exciting event, something kids genuinely looked forward to. Stores paired it with balloons, candy, and little in-store contests. Salesmen were encouraged to recommend fluoroscope checks every few months, even every season, framing it less like a shopping convenience and more like a routine health checkup. Every additional scan meant another reason for a family to come back, another opportunity to sell another pair of shoes. It's worth noting how genuinely widespread this marketing strategy became. Fluoroscopes weren't confined to specialty stores or big city department chains. Small-town shoe shops advertised proudly. One Wisconsin store's 1940s slogan read simply, "Shoes of quality, X-ray fitted, treating the machine as a point of local pride rather than anything unusual or concerning. This is the dark origin, and if you like uncovering the strange, often overlooked history hiding behind everyday objects, hit subscribe now. Drop a comment telling us what forgotten invention or overlooked danger you want us to dig into next, and we'll go find the real story. Now, here's where the story turns genuinely unsettling. These machines were, quite literally, medical X-ray equipment, operating with essentially none of the safety protocols an actual hospital would require. The shielding inside many units was minimal, sometimes just a thin sheet of aluminum between the customer's feet and the X-ray tube itself. Radiation didn't just pass cleanly through the foot and stop. It scattered, spreading well beyond the intended target, exposing legs, torsos, and anyone standing nearby. And unlike a hospital patient receiving one carefully measured X-ray for a specific diagnosis, children using shoe-fitting fluoroscopes were sometimes encouraged to use the machine repeatedly, month after month, year after year, for something as routine as buying school shoes. The people facing the greatest risk, though, weren't even the customers. It was the salespeople running the machine, sometimes dozens of times a day, every single working day, for years. Some employees were documented receiving radiation exposure many times higher than what was even loosely considered safe for the era. By 1950, warnings had started reaching the public. A senior physicist working for New York City hospitals cautioned that these machines could cause radiation burns and increase leukemia risk, particularly in children. That same year, health officials in Los Angeles reported cases of abnormal bone growth linked directly to fluoroscope exposure. There's a particularly striking earlier example worth mentioning here, too. Between 1941 and 1943, dozens of workers at a California shipbuilding company were documented as having received dangerous fluoroscope exposure through repeated occupational use, years before the shoe store warnings made headlines. The danger wasn't some sudden 1950s discovery. Pieces of the warning had already been quietly accumulating in isolated industrial and medical case reports for a decade or more before the public conversation finally caught up. You'd think warnings like that would have shut the whole industry down almost overnight. They didn't. Shoe stores, in many documented cases, were reluctant to give up their machines. Some store owners in Los Angeles specifically pointed to parental demand, insisting families wanted the X-ray fitting experience and would take their business elsewhere without it. The machine had become, in a very real sense, a beloved feature of the shopping trip itself, and beloved features are hard to walk away from voluntarily, warnings or not. Regulation, when it finally came, arrived slowly and unevenly. Pennsylvania became the first state to formally ban shoe-fitting fluoroscopes in 1957, decades after the devices had first appeared in stores. Other states followed at wildly different speeds over the following years. It wasn't until 1971 that the Food and Drug Administration was even granted federal authority to regulate radiation-emitting consumer devices in any comprehensive way. And by then, some version of this machine had already been standing in shoe stores for roughly half a century. Some units, remarkably, continued operating in isolated pockets well into the 1970s before finally disappearing from commercial use entirely. It's worth sitting with just how gradual this decline really was. Even after Pennsylvania's 1957 ban, other states took their own separate paths, some acting within a few years, others taking well over a decade to follow suit. There was no single dramatic moment when the shoe-fitting fluoroscope simply vanished from American life. It faded out unevenly, one reluctant state, one reluctant store owner at a time, which in its own way says almost as much about how the danger was handled as the original invention itself. Picture that shoe store again, the one you started with. The glowing green image of your own foot bones, your mother looking through her own viewing port, smiling, the salesman flipping the switch like it was nothing at all. For roughly 50 years, this was simply what buying a pair of shoes looked like for millions of American families, and almost nobody involved saw anything unusual about it. Not because people were careless, but because the entire experience had been so thoroughly, so convincingly wrapped in the language of science and progress that questioning it felt almost unreasonable. Maybe that's the real lesson sitting inside this strange little machine. It's easy to imagine that danger always announces itself clearly, with warning labels and cautious experts standing by. But sometimes it just sits quietly in the corner of an ordinary shoe store for half a century, dressed up as a helpful convenience, waiting patiently for enough people to finally start asking the obvious question out loud.